Hey guys, my name is Gabby, welcome back to my channel, and today I'm coming at you with another thriller recommendations video. And I believe this is actually going to be the 6th time that I've done this. I try to make thriller recommendation videos every 6 months, so this will be catching you up on all the thrillers that I've read since October last year that I've really enjoyed. And yeah, I've been doing this kind of recommendation style video for a while, so if you're interested in some more thrillers besides the ones that are going to be mentioned in this video, then you can definitely check out, I'll link all the ones that I've done down below. There's 5 other videos of different thriller recommendations if you need some more. I'm just really excited, so I want to jump into it. I have a few that I want to recommend that are like books that I highly recommend, and then I also have some that I still want to recommend that were more closer towards 3 stars, but I still think they're worth reading. I'm going to start with the ones that I highly recommend and that I gave very high ratings to, and then we'll work our way down. I'm going to start with some of the ones that I gave 5 stars to. So the first one I want to talk about is one of my most recent reads, and that is The Guest List by Lucy Folly. This one is a book of the month pick actually for this month, and this book actually comes out in May, and this one is such a fun thriller. It has a lot of my favorite thriller tropes because this one takes place on an isolated island in Ireland, and it takes place during the scene of a wedding, and this one's kind of like a classic whodunit story because right off the bat we find out someone is murdered, but we don't know who it is that gets murdered, and we don't know who murdered them. This was like an easy 5 stars for me because I loved the isolated island vibes, and I loved the whole drama of like the wedding, and we do follow 6 different characters in this book, so it can be kind of hard in the beginning to like tell who is who, but I personally found it very easy to get into and I was invested almost right away. I got it wrong, who did it, at the end, and I was so surprised. The next thriller that I gave 5 stars to is The One by John Mars. This one is actually a sci-fi kind of thriller because it takes place in this somewhat futuristic world where people can take a DNA test and find out who the one is for them, like the soulmate, like the person they're supposed to spend the rest of their lives with. And it's really cool because we follow 5 different characters in this book, and one of them happens to be a serial killer. It's just so fascinating to see the way that this DNA test can like change these people's lives in different ways. My personal favorite characters to read from the point of view from were Nick and Christopher. Like they just had really interesting storylines, but I just loved the heck out of this book. It is such a fast-paced fun thriller. Like, oh, I just had such a good time with it. Another thriller I recently read that I absolutely loved is He Started It by Samantha Downing. This is this author's 2nd book, and this was actually supposed to come out in April, but they pushed the date back to July, so it's not coming out until July now, which is depressing. But this book was so much fun, and this book basically follows these 3 siblings who are trying to earn their family inheritance because their grandfather just recently died. So they have to take this road trip that's kind of like the same road trip from their childhood, and it's a road trip across America to go and get their grandpa's inheritance money. But there's like so many secrets in their family, and there's somebody following them on the road, and I just love the family dynamics between the siblings in this book, and their relationship that they had with their grandpa was very interesting. I'm not even usually a fan of road trips, to be honest. Like, it's not something I enjoy reading about in books, but this book was so much fun, and the ending of this book was explosive and crazy, and I felt like I needed to reread those last 5 pages like so many times to get a full grasp of what just happened. And I loved it. I loved it so much. I discovered one of my new favorite thriller authors recently, and that is Karin Slaughter, because I've recently read both of these Karin Slaughter books. I read Pretty Girls first, and then I read The Good Daughter, and I think they're both really good. I do think Pretty Girls is my favorite out of these 2, but Pretty Girls is this thriller that follows these 2 sisters who are estranged and they're no longer speaking, but then something happens right at the beginning of this book to kind of like bring them together again. Really dark. It's one of the darkest books that I've ever read, and if you can't stomach really graphic violence and graphic rape scenes and just like literally anything you can imagine is in this book, it's awful, and it's definitely like up there. Like, I think this is the darkest book that I've ever read, and it's really depressing and really sad, but it's written so freaking well. Like, it is such a good thriller. There are some plot twists in here that I did not see coming, and same with The Good Daughter. Like, The Good Daughter is also up there as one of my most darkest reads that I've ever read, And this book also follows two sisters. Karin Slaughter just has this thing about sisters, and I really love reading about sisters, so I think it's what makes me love these books even more. But this one is about these two sisters who we follow them, like in the very beginning of this book, we witness this scene with them that like traumatizes them and changes their lives. And it's basically these men coming into their house and brutally murdering their mother and then doing things to them as well. And it's just brutal to read about. Like, it's really, really graphic. And then we follow these two sisters 28 years later when the younger sister, Charlie, is a lawyer and she's on this school campus when there's a school shooting. And then somehow that kind of correlates with what happened to them in the past. This book is also very dark. I don't know if it's quite as dark as Pretty Girls, but they both are dark in their own ways. And I do think I prefer Pretty Girls over The Good Daughter, but they're both really, really good. Like, Karin Slaughter is like a damn good author. Like, her writing is beautiful. Like, it is graphic and visual, but like you really feel everything when you read these books. Like, they're so good. The next one I want to mention is Long Bright River by Lismore. I will admit, it's not so much thriller, it feels more like literary mystery to me. I highly, highly recommend this one. This book is so good. It mainly follows this girl character who's a cop, and she has this sister who's a drug addict who's like living on the streets, and there's this like murderer, serial killer going around their town killing all these women, and then the cop's sister can't get in touch with her sister who's on the street. Like, she doesn't know where she is, and so she fears that like she might have been murdered by this guy, and so she starts to do her own investigating into the disappearance of her sister. This book is just so well written. Like, it's so good. And I do say it's less thriller and more like literary mystery because it is like a slow burn kind of thriller. It's not like fast-paced and intense, but it is like such a beautiful story and such an interesting mystery happening in this that it kept me flipping the pages. Like, this book is so long, it's like 450 pages almost, but I read this within like 2 days. Like, it was so interesting and so good. And the next thriller I wanted to talk about is Darling Rose Gold by Stephenie Robel. This book is a thriller that's inspired by a true story. I don't know too much about the true story, to be honest, but I've heard that it's inspired by something that actually happened. It's basically about this girl named Rose Gold who has been getting poisoned by her mom her whole life without her being aware of it, because she thought she was ill basically her whole life, but it was actually like her mom making her sick. So this book actually follows her 5 years after her mom's been in prison for going to prison for what she did to her, and then her mom's being released from prison and she's gonna come move back in with her and her son. This book is really interesting though because it goes back and forth between this timeline of 5 years later when the mom's being released from prison, and then we get to jump back into the past and see what was going on while she was in prison. This book was surprisingly so good. Like, I did not think I would love this book as much as I did, and this one wasn't like up there as like one of my favorite thrillers ever, but it was definitely like a 4-star book for me. I really enjoyed it. There was a plot twist that I did not see coming for some reason. I was like so shook towards the end of this book. There was just something about this ending, like, I don't know how to explain it without spoiling you, but I just didn't love the ending of this. But this is still something I would highly recommend. Like, this book was such a wild ride and it was so interesting to read about these characters. And then another thriller that I recently enjoyed, this was actually the first book that I read this year, is Little Secrets by Jennifer Hilliard. This one follows this woman who, her son, her little like toddler son, has been missing for over a year and nothing has really gone on, and so she hires this private investigator to like look into it more and try to figure out what happened to her son. And then the private investigator finds out that her husband is cheating on her with this other woman. This main character girl is like, oh hell no, I've already lost my son, I'm not gonna lose my husband too, kind of thing, if you know what I mean. This book was crazy. Like, this book, again, this one's not one of my all-time favorite thrillers, but this was definitely like a 4-star read for me. I had a lot of fun with this storyline, and this story, like, I feel like it's one of those thrillers where every single chapter kind of ends on a little cliffhanger just to keep you like hooked and interested in the book. And this ending got a little bit cheesy for me, I will say. Like, it was a little bit cliched, but I had a lot of fun reading this book. I thought this topic was so interesting to read about. Okay, and now I wanted to jump into some of the thrillers that I gave like about 3 stars to, but I still think that they're worth recommending and that there is an audience for these books of people that I do think will really enjoy these. But for me personally, I just had some issues with them, which caused them to be like closer to 3 stars. So they're not like all-time favorite thrillers for me, but I definitely think they're books that are still worth recommending. The first one is going to be 8 Perfect Murders by Peter Swanson. This was like a highly anticipated book for me, and then unfortunately it ended up just being okay for me. This book is really interesting because it follows from the point of view of this guy who owns this bookstore, and he wrote this blog post a long time ago called The 8 Perfect Murders in Fiction, where he talks about these 8 different mystery books that have the perfect murders in them. And then in this book there's this serial killer out there who is attempting to recreate all of these 8 perfect murders. And this book is really interesting. The only thing I will say that kind of sucks is that this book does spoil you for all of the 8 books that he's referring to in this book. So if you have any of these 8 books on your TBR, then just be warned that he does spoil you for all of them in this book. And I do feel like the ending of this book really dropped the ball, but I still want to recommend this book because of the tone and the mood of this book is really good, and I loved the first half of this book so much. Like, it was so entertaining and so interesting. Another book that kind of like drops the ball at the end, but otherwise I think it's a really solid thriller, is The Chain, because this one has like one of the most interesting book premises I've ever heard, because it's about this parent who their child gets kidnapped and taken from them, and the only way they can get their child back is to go and kidnap another child. This book is just so crazy. Like, can you imagine being a parent and having to deal with this situation? Like, I just think like this premise alone is so cool and so fascinating to read about, and this book reads really quick, so like I flew through this book so quickly. But I will say, like, the ending definitely does drop the ball and it gets really cheesy at the end, but I still think that this is a solid thriller, and like I had so much fun reading this book, and it's definitely stuck in my memory for a few months, so I would definitely check this one out if it sounds interesting to you. Another thriller that I think is okay is The Other People by CJ Tudor. This is actually the one that I did a buddy read with Kayla for this book, so I can link down the live show if you missed it. This book ended up being okay for me. It was like a 3-star book for me, but I still think that this is something that's really interesting and worth reading if it sounds interesting to you, because it follows this man who is in his car on the highway, and he thinks he sees his 7-year-old daughter in the back seat of the car that's in front of him. She looks to him and mouths "daddy" towards him, and then the car speeds off, and he never sees his daughter again after that, because shortly after he gets a phone call from the police saying that his daughter and his wife have been killed, and they suspect that he did it. For this book, we're trying to figure out, like, it's following about like a year later when he still hasn't found them or found any evidence of them, and he's driving on this highway every day trying to find this car that he believes like took his daughter. This book is really interesting. It goes to places that I didn't think that it would, and I don't know, I feel like this book had so much potential, but like for me the ending was just kind of like cheesy and over the top. But I still think that this book was like a really solid thriller. It was still a fun time, so like if this sounds at all interesting to you, I would still recommend it, you know? Then the last one is gonna be The Sundown Motel by Simone St. James. This one was also like one of my most anticipated books of the year, and then it just kind of ended up being okay for me, but the vibes in this book are really spooky and creepy, and I like live for that shit. This book follows this girl who was working at this motel in the 80s, and then in alternate chapters we follow her niece in the future when she's an adult, and she's trying to go back to this motel to find out what happened to her aunt, because her aunt's been missing ever since, and like nobody's ever done anything about it and tried to find her. And so this book is really interesting, and it's really spooky and weird, because like I love thrillers that kind of have like a haunted house vibe or like a haunted something vibe, so I loved the motel vibes in this, like with the haunted and spookiness. Like, it was great, but I feel like my issue with this book was that it got a little bit too repetitive, and the scenes in the past and the present felt way too similar, and I couldn't tell which one was which sometimes. And I feel like this is one of those thrillers where you're kind of told information and then you're waiting for the main character to like catch up, and I kind of like hate that so much in a thriller. But other than that, I really loved the vibes of this book, of this spooky motel, and like, I don't know, I still think it's something worth reading and worth recommending, so if that sounds interesting to you, check it out. But I do think this author's first book that I read, The Broken Girls, is a lot better. But if you've already read that and you want to read another book by this author, then I still recommend this one. Those are all the thriller recommendations that I have for you today. I'm sorry I've had to move this camera a few times because the sun is starting to come out and it's like throwing off everything of my lighting, but if you've read any of these thrillers, then please let me know what your thoughts are on them and if they're also some of your favorites. And if you've read any really good thrillers lately that you think I would enjoy, then please comment them down below so I can go and check out some new thrillers. And yeah, and if you're looking for some more thriller recommendations, again, I'll be linking down below all the previous 5 videos that I've done. So there are quite a bit of different recommendations if you need something else. Thank you guys so much for watching as always, and I will see you guys very soon with a new video. Bye.